my friends, to week one of your inner relationships and shadow work journey. I am so glad that you are here for me on this seasonal exploration. This week, we are starting simply with awareness. It's not about fixing or changing or forcing insight. This week is simply about learning how to notice yourself with a little bit more kindness and compassion. The tool that we are going to be using for the next 30 days to do that is shadow work. A lot of people hear the phrase shadow work and think that it means that we're going to be digging up all of our old trauma and reliving old painful experiences. And that is not at all what we are going to be doing here. In our journey, shadow work simply means bringing a very gentle light to the parts of ourselves that learn how to survive, the patterns, the habits, the emotional responses that we formed to keep ourselves safe at some point in time during our life. Nothing about you is wrong. Nothing about you needs to be judged. We are just becoming more curious and aware of how we are operating and why we operate the way that we do. You may be starting this journey just wanting to dive into the work. And yet here we are starting with awareness. So I want you to sort of regulate and pull yourself back and be open to the possibility that awareness is really the most important place to start. Because without that awareness, any future work that we do will be for nothing. You can't change something if you don't see it first. My coach has told me for years that the process of any sort of transformational journey or meaningful change starts by looking, seeing, telling the truth, and taking authentic action. And so even in that simple structure, we begin with awareness by looking and telling ourselves the truth. So before we start to repattern anything or work with our body or our emotions, we have to first understand what is showing up for me and when does that happen? How does my body respond in those types of situations? And what types of stories do I tell myself in those moments? That awareness is so crucial because it allows us to step back into our power. Because with that awareness, we also see that we have choices to make. And that's the true power that we want to come home to. That awareness creates choices, and those choices create our freedom. This seasonal journey is about your inner relationship and shadow work. And what I mean by that is the way that you relate to yourself internally, how we talk to ourselves regularly without even noticing it. That will include how you talk to yourself when you're stressed, how you respond to discomfort or conflict, how your nervous system reacts in relationships, and the parts of you that people please or shut down, overfunction, and avoid. None of these are flaws. They are just protective strategies that we learned somewhere along the way. And in this week one, we're simply starting to notice them so we can evaluate whether or not those strategies and reactions continue to serve who we want to be moving forward. One of the things that I learned about myself through this inner relationship shadow work journey is the way that I talk to myself around expectations and showing up for other people. Growing up in the Midwest, there's this idea of Midwest nice. And I think for women, especially, this idea of Midwest nice really played into my tendency and desire to people please and get kind of that feel good from people pleasing. And as I started to do this inner relationship work and noticing my patterns in the way I was talking to myself, what I found was that when I would say no to someone or set a boundary with someone, brain would kind of go on the offense against myself and tell me I was being selfish. I was being closed off. I was sort of hiding my gifts from people around me and thinking more of myself than other people and just kind of being a selfish jerk. And I kind of would go on these rampages about what a bad person I was for saying no or setting a boundary. And in fact, one of the things that I noticed was that usually in the moment when someone would ask me to do something, I would have an immediate response in my head, yes or no. And I would have kind of a visceral or like a gut response, knowing like that is my answer. I would try and buy myself space because I would feel myself wanting to say yes, even though my internal thinking would be, maybe I don't want to do that. And that conflict would cause me to say, I just need to buy some time. I need to take some space and like think about it before I give an answer to this person. And what I found was when I took space to think about it before giving an answer, I would talk myself into the opposite decision than my initial immediate response. In other words, if my immediate response was, no, I don't want to do this, over time, during that gap where I was thinking about it, I would beat myself up for saying no. Of course, you have time. This is not a big deal. You can absolutely squeeze it in. It's going to mean something to them. Who do you think you are? You're so self important. Oh, you need all this time to rest and relax at the end of the day. Oh, poor you. And I would beat myself up into ultimately saying yes. And so what I found was in that moment, I knew the answer and I just needed to honor that immediate knowing. And I started to pay better attention to that inner dialogue that I would have with myself and the way I would talk to myself when I set boundaries or did things that I somewhere intuitively knew were for my greatest and highest good. But it was that patterning, that Midwest nice, that people pleaser in me, and the way she would talk to myself that would talk me out of that original response and that gut reaction that sort of knew what the right answer was for me. So through doing this inner relationship work, I started to recognize that that was a pattern that I had in giving answers to people. Even though I already knew my answer out of the gate, I'd buy myself time, I'd take space, and I beat myself up at it and come to the opposite response. And so I was able to sort of recognize that in that moment when I had a response, that was my response that I needed to go with. And I was able to build a different pattern that way and not make space for that negative self-talk that was really diminishing my own authenticity. That's just one of the many small ways that this inner relationship shadow work has really changed the way I show up for myself and with myself. So over the next few weeks, I want to tell you a little bit about what we're going to be doing here. Every day of the week, you're going to receive a very small practice. It's not overwhelming. It's not time consuming. This is not intended to be the biggest portion of your day or just another thing on your to-do list. For the most part, I'm asking you to notice simple things like emotional reactions, repetitive patterns, sensations in your body, or your own inner dialogue. Some days may feel really validating. Some days may feel really tender. You may feel like you're discovering new things about yourself that you didn't even realize were there. And with that comes some shame and some self-judgment. So all of it's welcome. All of it is part of the process. And what I want you to remember is that awareness is already a form of healing. So the worst thing that we can possibly do is to take that awareness and judge ourselves for it and beat ourselves up for what we're noticing. The noticing is progress. Beating yourself up is just creating a whole new pattern that's going to set us back in the future. So the goal here is just to develop that awareness. We will get into the change. We will get into the transformation. But for now, out of the gate, we're just going to start noticing what's happening. I want to invite you to take the daily prompts and exercises with you throughout the day so that you can create some space to see what comes up and make space for the answers to find you. In this day and age, I feel like we're always so overstimulated and there's always so many things coming at us and stimulating us that as we do this kind of work, it is really important to find some intentional space just to be with yourself and to be with your thoughts. Because oftentimes the answers that we're looking for, they will come to us in due time. We can't force those insights. And so perhaps if you're someone who always has music playing while like you're in the shower, maybe during this journey, you just allow the shower to be your own quiet, private time with your thoughts and open that space for insight and awareness. Similarly, if you go for a walk or walk the dog and you're always listening to a podcast or you're listening to music, I would encourage you to experiment with doing that silently without any additional stimulation. And again, just seeing what comes up for you. As you go about your day, sometimes I find it's helpful to write down the prompts or the questions on a Post-it note and just come back to it periodically and remind yourself of reconnecting with that awareness and whatever that prompt is for the day. Again, inviting that insight and that truth to make itself seen when the timing is right. One of my favorite pieces of art that I have here in my home is an image with some text overlay that says, "Truth whispers gently that we may hear." And I find that to be so true because I believe that often our own inner knowing, it is quiet and it is soft. And if we don't make space to slow down and listen, whether it's through meditation or yoga or just a quiet, silent walk or a shower, we miss it. And so making time during this experience to just listen and hear what truths are trying to come through for you. One thing I also want you to keep in mind as you work through this experience, I really want to emphasize that if at any time this feels overwhelming, take a break, take a pause, put your feet on the floor, take a big breath in through your nose, let it out through your mouth, touch something solid around you, reconnect with your space. Your nervous system matters more than any breakthrough. And this work is always going to be there waiting for you when you're ready. Not everybody is made to go through this and work through this every single day and take time on this every single day. Sometimes it's a little overwhelming, and that's okay. But honor that, pay attention to what's happening in your body and care for yourself as needed, and then continue on for yourself when the time is right. As I close this message and invite you to kick off your first week, I want to invite you to set an intention for this week. Maybe it's something like, I choose curiosity over judgment, or I allow myself to notice without fixing, or even I am safe to be honest with myself. And remembering always that you don't need to rush this work. You don't need to get it perfect. Just show up, and I'll see you in the practices this week.